If you are an ICF member, the following information might be relevant to you since ICF have new accreditation rules. The ICF now requires you to complete a quiz after watching a session recording so you can get CC units for it. After you fully watch this session recording, simply scroll down to the session resources and find a one-question quiz. Please complete it and you will ensure that you've received the CC units for this session. And if you already attended this session live, you've already been granted the CC units for it, and you don't need to complete this quiz. Also, here is a quick tutorial on how to get the most out of our new video player. Click on the CC button to turn on captions. Click on the search button, enter a specific keyword, and then click on the result. And you will be taken to the part of the video where your keyword is mentioned. Click here to download raw transcripts and head over here for the downloadable audio. That's it from me. Hope you enjoyed this session.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I'm so sorry for the delayed start there. We just had some issues with Elizabeth's slides in the very last minute. So typical, because they were working perfectly half an hour ago, and then technology has just stepped in and given us a little bit of a challenge. So Elizabeth's slides are probably going to stay like this for the rest of the session. We can't put them in full screen mode for some bizarre reason today. So very sorry about that. Anyway, welcome to the Coach Showcase. It is so great to have you with us. This session is Unlocking Epiphany Moments in Coaching with Elizabeth and Stewart, who I will introduce in just a moment. So as everyone logs in and gets situated, please take a moment to let me know that you can hear me by typing into the Q&A box where in the world you are joining us from. And because we're almost at the end of the week, I would love to know what everybody is looking forward to this weekend. So please type those into the Q&A box, what you're up to this weekend, what you're most looking forward to, and I would love to read some of those. My name is Beth Schofield, and I will be your host for Elizabeth's session today. And we have Leo with us handling your questions and all of the logistics in the background as well. So some quick housekeeping. This session is going to last for 60 minutes. You are going to use the Q&A box to interact with us. The chat box is disabled, and that is only used for us to deliver information to you. And we have some IM sessions as well for today's session, and they are taking place 1 hour after the end of the session today. And we also have some next Tuesday as well. And Leo is going to share the link where you can sign up for those into the chat box. So for those of you who don't know, the Coach Showcase is an exclusive feature of the Full Summit, which provides premium members with the opportunity to apply and speak at the Full Summit themselves. So today is the first session of this year's Coach Showcase series. And from now until May next year, Coach Showcase sessions are going to take place in the last week of every month. So we hope you can join us for as many of those as possible and support your peers as they take to the stage. So first of all, I'd love to congratulate Elizabeth on being selected for the Coach Showcase, and I'm delighted to introduce her to you now. So in addition to spiritual direction, Dr. Stewart focuses on life coaching, coach education, and writing coaching. She has over 35 years experience offering inner guidance, retreats, and seminars, and holds a PhD in theology from the University of Malta. She is the author of 12 books and many articles, and her specialties include the mythic imagination, archetypes, and dream work. And as a teacher and spiritual coach, she is committed to expanding consciousness and compassion through the inward journey. Sorry. So with that, Elizabeth, I am going to hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Beth, and appreciate the introduction. So we are going to begin then with epiphany moments, and I'd like to start by talking about epiphany moments in terms of a definition. For many people, epiphany moments are related to something religious, but they go beyond that. And they go into any kind of surprise that stuns, startles, shocks, that somehow turns our world upside down, that really makes an impact on us. It's more than a surprise. It really is something that is It turns the world upside down, as I said. So having defined or given a brief definition of epiphany moments, I'm going to invite Leo to bring up on the screen a poll to see your thoughts about epiphany moments. And the question then, the first question is, when epiphany moments come your way, you are most likely to. And then you've got a series of options there. And then there's another question, and that has to do with when your clients are about to have an epiphany, you are most likely to. So.
All right, thank you for everybody voting. The responses are just starting to come in now, so really appreciate that. We've got about half of our attendees have voted, so we'll keep it open another 10-20 seconds or so, and then we'll close it up. Alrighty, thank you, Leo. There's the results.
Okay, I can only see, Beth, I can only see on my screen the first one, which is looks like 95% of people would welcome them enthusiastically, but I don't see the other results.
Yeah, you can just scroll down on the poll screen, Elizabeth, or if you can't see it, then I can read those out to you.
Yes, I can only see some of them when I scroll down. I can see some answers to question 2, but not to question 1. So perhaps you can read out the results.
Okay, fabulous. So for question 1, we have 95% said that they welcomed them enthusiastically and 5% acknowledged them reluctantly. Then we had 0% for the last 3 options. And then for question 2, so when your clients are about to have an epiphany moment, you are most likely to. We've got stay silent, 48%, ask powerful questions, 26%, dissect what is happening, 8%, maintain a neutral presence, 18%, and speed up the process to get it over with is 0%. Thank goodness.
Oh, thank goodness. I'm glad to hear that nobody would speed up the process to get over with it. What I'd love you to do is to sort of remember your answers to this, you know, whether you are one person who acknowledged the epiphany moment reluctantly or whether you were enthusiastic, just to sort of remember your response. And then at the end of the presentation to see if you would still respond in the same way. So having said that, let us move on. And I'm going to go through some definitions now of epiphany moments, which take us beyond my initial comments. So first of all, we have the etymology, and it's always a good idea to begin with etymology. It's a kind of showing forth, manifesting, revealing. But I'd like to expand on that even further and take us to 6 defining epiphany moments. And I look at the following words: manifestation, discovery, insight, perception, intuition, and a sudden life-changing encounter with truth. So each of those can be unpacked, and I will do so right now, moving us on to I'll look at moving on one more. The first thing is theophany or manifestation. And although my background is spiritual direction and so forth, I don't typically expect a theophany to happen in a life coaching session. Probably even less likely to happen in an executive coaching session, but sometimes people do come in, clients come in having had some kind of divine experience, and this happens in all the world's traditions, and it's in all the sacred traditions of the world, whether it's in Buddhism or Hinduism, whether it's in Christianity or Judaism, that somehow manifestation of the holy is one aspect of an epiphany. Something else which doesn't often happen in a coaching session, but it can, is the eureka moment. And here I am using Vitruvius's story, which may or may not have been factual, about Archimedes. And it's a sort of funny story. King Hero's brand was at stake, you might say, to use contemporary jargon. He had just left a votive offering for the gods and was informed that the gold crown he had left as his offering in tribute to military victory may have had some polluting metals inside it. And so he then tasked Archimedes to discover whether or not the crown was made of solid gold or something else. And so this is where, in the bathtub, whatever kind of bathtub it was, Archimedes discovered that that items of the same volume displace the same amount of water. And that was his theory that led him to the excited "Eureka" exclamation, jumping out of the bathtub, stark naked, and running through the streets of Syracuse like a madman, really, and was able to use that same principle to test the crown for its gold content, and discovered that indeed it weighed less than a gold block of the same weight, what should have been the same weight, and did not displace the same amount of water, and therefore the craftsperson was taken off to the torturers, and the king's reputation was saved, and Archimedes' brand was saved, you might say. So discovery moments then form part of epiphanies. But then we have insight, and certainly if I think about the Buddha meditating under the Bodhi tree and coming to the conclusion that all life is suffering, and that the cause of suffering is attachment, you might say that's an insight that he arrived at. And moving right along to Galileo, he was perceptive, and part of his perception was the ability to use a telescope to look at the different heavenly bodies. And by observing the surface of the moon, he noticed imperfections, that it wasn't as smooth as people of that era thought, and that there were valleys and craters and mountains, and who knows, perhaps there was even water. And so as a result of his perception, his observations, the prevailing geocentric view of the universe was challenged, debunked, you might say. Then you have intuition, premonition as another form of epiphany. And my exemplar for this is Chief Seattle. And the excerpt from the letter that I have in this particular slide may or may not have been written by him. Historians actually say it was written the way he would have written it, but most likely he did not physically write the text here. But certainly Chief Seattle had a premonition that the sale of land to the US government was going to lead to the desacralization of the land, that somehow, as a result of selling the land, nature would be sold out. And he pointed out that the earth is sacred to my people, and every shining pine needle, every sandy shore, every mist in the dark woods, every clearing and humming insect is holy in the memory and experience of my people. And yet what we ended up having, of course, is a world of concrete and talking wires. And as a result of this, you might say his intuition was right on target. And then we have encounter with truth. And my exemplar is a rather unfortunate one, taken from Sophocles' play Oedipus Rex. And not all discoveries are happy ones. So Oedipus discovers that he had killed his father, King Laus, married his mother, Queen Jocasta, and sired his own siblings. So those are 6 categories then of epiphany moments that I'd like you to keep in mind as we continue on. And one more point I'd like to bring up is the short story as a literary means of embodying epiphany moments. In fact, structurally speaking, the epiphany moment is essential to the modern short story. And if there isn't a moment of revelation at the end, not only to the character or the protagonist but also to the reader, one has to ask, was this really a short story or was it simply a narrative? But the short story as a literary genre always has a moment of revelation. It's structurally important. You begin with a plateau, then there is the presenting problem, the unraveling of the problem, and the realization or the awakening. And just as revelation is essential to the short story, I believe it is also essential to coaching, that epiphany moments aren't simply embellishments, but rather they are organic to the coaching process. And I have to ask also that if there aren't any epiphany moments, has coaching indeed happened? So what is coaching? There are multiple definitions out there, and this is my own attempt at a definition. I just want to focus on the beginning words rather than go through it line by line, but I see coaching as both a journey and a destination. It's a process. It's not just the fulfillment of goals and next steps that are important, but rather the whole journey of discovery, the whole experience of looking at life from different angles, at looking at different possibilities. And so rather than focus on outcomes, I'd like to see coaching as a process. And this is where my question then comes to a change of perspectives. And I'm hoping this whole slide is visible here. Let me just move my mouse a little bit. A change of perspective, if there isn't a change of perspective, if one hasn't gone deeper in the coaching process, if one hasn't gained clarity and understanding, if one hasn't encountered truth, has coaching really happened? Pointing to the chandelier, which I'm hoping you're able to see, you'll notice that it's hanging from the ceiling of a fairly sterile ceiling, I should say, and it reaches down to the floor, when one would expect a chandelier to have space beneath it. According to the backstory here, the chandelier was donated to some building in Manhattan and did not fit. And it was therefore donated to this particular building where it didn't fit either, but it now hangs and touches the floor. When I first saw it, I thought it might be a relic from the Titanic. It's really a beautiful chandelier. It happens to hang in the building where my son lives. But it sort of makes me think about mind shifting, where you have one set of expectations and assumptions and suddenly realize that, well, a chandelier doesn't necessarily have to hang freely. It can touch the floor and give light. So back to my question, can coaching be coaching if there is no epiphany moment? And I'd like to clarify here that it doesn't have to be an epiphany moment within the individual session, but somewhere in the contracted time. In other words, it can be at the end of a coaching contract, doesn't have to be in a single session, but the movement of the contract, the moving of the time between coach and client, whether the client is a team or an individual, needs to be towards some kind of revelation, discovery, awareness, intuition, perception, or insight, or otherwise, is it really coaching? So what are the skills that coaches need to distinguish, to be able to facilitate rather in themselves, to cultivate in themselves? Coaches, I believe, should be able to distinguish parts from the whole, big picture from little picture, the real from the fantastical, the context from the out of context, the dangerous from the harmless. We're going to see a series of slides now which basically point out to the skills that coaches need to cultivate. I'm going to go fairly quickly here because I really want to focus more on how to shift the perspective of the client, but you will be able to see this for yourselves later. So again, coaches can distinguish limitation from abundance. I'm going to stop with that one. It's also being able to see beneath the surface. So at a first glance, you're looking at an image of opulence. You have the purple and you have the fancy table, and then you have an image of poverty here. But a skilled coach can look at these two images and ask probing questions. And perhaps the person who is in this place of opulence is no happier than the person in the place of servitude. It's a possibility. So we have to go beyond appearances and be able to distinguish, okay, visually, it looks as though whoever owned the table is in a better place than the person who's in the dirt. But really, in terms of life happiness, can we assume that, or do we need to somehow probe deeper? So coaches then go beneath the surface always. They can see the whole picture instead of part of the picture, and they can distinguish the subtext from the main text. This main text here is a scene from Christmas season on the island I come from. I come from the island of Malta. And the subtext here is the word love. And so this becomes the focus. You can see the whole picture and its place in there. But if I want to probe deeper and say, well, what is all this about? Then I would focus on this particular word, and that might be the place to go. The facilitator for Epiphanies, the coach, is comfortable with unknowing and in exploring the unknown, and also can cross over into the client's experience. These street scenes come from my little island home, the island of Malta. And if I were trying to explain village life to you, it might be difficult explaining how very narrow the roads are if you haven't been there. But if you look at these images, you can see that in a village setting, somebody on this balcony can talk to their neighbor on that balcony, and that basically the streets are so narrow that there isn't much privacy. Your windows are really, looking into somebody else's windows, and then cars try and come down the street and get stuck, or they go at high speed. And so I'm trying to get you then to cross over into my experience of village life. And as coaches, we need to listen to our clients who may come from very different backgrounds than our own. And so somehow to help them, help the client articulate what it is that is precious to them, their background, and then so we ourselves can imagine and enter into their experience. The facilitator of Epiphanies, the coach, also notices the details. And I remember when on first seeing the wall in the memorial for 9/11 in Manhattan, I noticed the single rose next to somebody's name, and was really struck by that one white rose. And somehow in a coaching session, it might be the single white rose that matters more than anything else. The coach also needs to stay focused, just like this fishing boat. The eyes are there for the boat to see its way in rough seas. The coach also needs to seek new perspectives. And these two horsemen face each other in downtown Chicago. But I have juxtaposed them to take away the wide road that separates them, so it looks almost as though they're looking at each other, whereas in fact there is a big road between them. The coach needs to be open to possibilities. And then, having seen all that, how do we shift a client's perspective? What is it we can do as coaches to help a client move beyond current thinking into new thinking without being aggressive about it, without having our own agenda, without forcing the process on the client, but being there and taking advantage of opportunities as they surface? I see working with Epiphany moments as something organic to the coaching process. It isn't a preset agenda, but rather it's something that happens in the process of coaching another, where the coach notices, perceives, intuits the opportunity. As part of our exploration here, I am going to share ICF's definition of coaching. And one of the reasons for doing this, I've broken it down into little units, and we're going to follow each unit as a form of going deeper into how to shift a focus. So don't worry if you haven't caught the whole definition here, but now you're going to see it in minute form, where we see that coaching, looking at the key terms according to the International Coaching Federation, involves a partnership. It's a thought-provoking process, a creative process, an inspirational process that maximizes personal and professional potential and can unlock previously untapped sources of imagination, productivity, and leadership. So let's start then with thought-provoking questions. And again, you will have the opportunity to see these questions at a later point. So I'm just going to focus on one. Question number 3, who dropped the ball? In coaching, we're taught and we're encouraged and we're reminded to ask thought-provoking questions. And in fact, beginning coaches can often get caught up in having to ask questions. And it can become a little bit aggravating to the person being coached when this barrage of questions surfaces, or when the coach seems to be stretching and reaching for the right question. It needs to be more organic. But let's go to who dropped the ball. It may be that you're coaching some executive who is talking about a lost contract that had lots and lots of potential, and the client continually uses the passive voice about, well, the ball was dropped and the deadline wasn't met, and we didn't reach out to the client on time, or we ignored the client's requests for help, or we didn't clarify things with the client. Okay, well, who is the we and who dropped the ball? And as a result of that kind of questioning, it may be that the CEO or the executive you're coaching suddenly realizes, has an epiphany, that he or she, in fact, was the one responsible for the ball being dropped, that he or she was the one who didn't reach out to the client, that rather than blaming the team or other subordinates, somehow the person in charge was the one who missed the moment. And so that kind of a question is not just thought-provoking, but it really leads the client into facing his or her own responsibility in that situation. And so that's an example of listening to the client's language and picking up on the use of the passive voice. And so the thought-provoking then startles the listener, you might say, the client, into having to admit, yeah, I dropped that ball. I dropped it. It was me. Yeah, I'm the one. I did it. Creative process. So the coach invites the client into a creative process. And I have a lot of fun with this. When my clients are used to me, I sort of begin to introduce more and more creative activities. And one, for example, if you look towards the bottom, if you were to show me 6 to 10 objects, that's rather too many. I'd rather say, let's say 3 to 4 objects that reveal who you are at this stage of life. What would you choose? And it's a moment for the client to reflect and to think, well, I'd show you my camera, for example. You know, that is very important to me right now. And so one by one, the client begins to itemize things of importance that reflect who that person is in the present moment at this stage of life, not who the client was yesterday, not who the client dreams of being tomorrow, but who is the client right now? So even having the client bring in some objects or some photographs that define who he or she is a creative activity. I do work with dream work, again, if the client is open to that. I sometimes ask clients to change the outcomes of their story. And sometimes I ask them to, when they mention a fork in the road, okay, can you draw the fork in the road, and what would be to the left and what would be to the right, and which one would be most desirable? One of the most amazing stories where I've used crayons with an executive, so this kind of creative process can happen in executive coaching. It's actually a handout you'll have available later. And in this particular experience, I had a client who was passed over for a promotion, And in fact, someone was hired over him who was far less qualified. And so my client, whom I would call Brian, wanted to know how he could work in harmony with his new boss. And I thought the question was an interesting one. So I came up with a little assignment for him. Now, again, this was not a new client. This was somebody I'd worked with, and so he was used to some of my creative strategies. And I asked him to draw himself in relationship to his boss and to tell me what happened. And so he drew himself as a kind of stick figure. And then he drew his boss. And then he sort of looked at the drawing and noticed that he had drawn himself as a very, very minute stick figure, whereas his new boss was quite enormous and growing. And so I asked Brian, I said, well, what is this telling you? And he said, well, it looks to me as though he wants to stamp on me. He wants to stomp on me and obliterate me. And as a result of that drawing, Brian decided to turn in his notice. He realized that there was no way he could work in harmony with his new boss, but rather the drawing itself revealed to him what his unconscious was telling him, that basically he'd become minute. The boss had taken on this huge, grandiose stature and would not tolerate someone who would shame him in the workplace by knowing more. So that's just a small example of creative process coming to an epiphany. And Brian's epiphany was, it's not going to work. I have to move on. Inspirational process. Who's been the most important role model in your life? How can you honor the memory of this person? What legacy do you want to leave for future generations? The question I keep on coming back to with my clients is, what does the world need from you now? We live in an age of real disintegration, where the world itself seems to be falling apart. And so to ask, what does the world need from you now, is really an invitation to look at one's gifts, to look at what one has to offer, and to see then how can I best serve given what the world needs. Another question that I find interesting is, if you were to write a personal mission statement, what would it say? And that always gives people room to reflect and to really sort of look at what it is they have to contribute to the world, and to what is it, how would they like to be remembered? What would their legacy be? And what generations are we talking about? What do future generations need of us now? So these questions are a part of an inspirational process that allow us to reflect. And again, this is where we need quiet. This is where we cannot be in a rush. This is where we cannot push the process, but rather it may be work that the client takes home to think about, well, how can I honor the memory of this person who was so dear for me and so influential? Now, how can I honor that person's memory? And how can I find strength in difficult times? All right, what do I need to do for myself to stay whole in such a way that I can work with people whose lives may be broken at times? How can I stay whole and be able to listen to other people's stories without projecting my own story onto them? How can I find the strength to go on even in difficult times? So again, to invite the client to reflect on where they can find strength and what spiritual practices might keep them grounded. And for everybody, the answer will be different. For some, it may be something like yoga or jogging. For somebody else, it may be prayer or meditation. For somebody else, it may be listening to music or composing music or playing music. But for everybody, the answer will be a bit different. And so whatever it is gives them strength is what they need to be doing to maintain their own strength in the times we find ourselves. At one time, it was popular to say we're in the VUCA time of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. But now even that doesn't define where we are today. And there are writers who talk about the brittleness of life, that life is entirely brittle and entirely unpredictable. And so we're living from one day to the next without knowing what the future will hold. And even, developments in artificial intelligence also compounding the complexity of the world we're living in. So in face of all of this, in face of nuclear threat, in face of warfare, how do we maintain our strength as coaches, and how do we help our clients to do the same? So how does the client maximize personal and professional potential? Again, sometimes there's a mixture of creativity here and reflection, an encounter with truth, but it might be, who do you want to be when you grow up? And, if you ask that question of some well-established client, it might seem a little bit ridiculous that the client has established a great deal, maybe has established some business, maybe the client has gained recognition in different fields. And yet the question then, who do you want to be when you grow up? What more is there left for the client to focus on? Is there something beyond the present moment? Has the client simply reached a place of coasting and isn't interested in developing more or exploring more or questioning more, but is quite happy to be at this plateau of safety? So what do you want to be when you grow up? And what does it mean to grow up? And it may be that there are all kinds of areas for exploration that the client can suddenly have the freedom to explore and to look at as new avenues for growth and contribution. Because when boredom sets in, when everything is more of the same, then excitement and enthusiasm disappear. And this is why we all need to be explorers. We all need to be journeying beyond what is comfortable into new territory. Questions like, where do you shine the most? Not where are you most successful, but where do you shine the most? Where do your gifts really come across and influence others the most deeply? So these are life questions, and they're not about how much money to make. They're not about getting to the top of the mountain and being above everybody else, but rather how to maximize whoever one is into the most that one can possibly be. And I don't want to sound like the Marine Corps here, but rather how can we be the best possible examples of ourselves? And so this gets us into unlocked sources of imagination, productivity, and leadership. And this is one of my favorite places to land. I love working with archetypes. I've done a lot of work in archetypal studies, give retreats on this and workshops, and have written on it. And anyway, so archetypes are very important to me because I see that we are all ruled by archetypes. And there are some which are more common than others. The hero archetype is particularly useful in a coaching session. In coaching, we want our clients to be the heroes of their own stories and not the victims. We want them to be the ones who are able to not just enter into conflict, but rise above it. We want them to be able to handle the complexities of life with grace. We want them also to have something of the warrior in them, not to be ruthless, but rather to have the tools for fighting for justice, for standing up to the establishment when critique needs to be offered. We need them to be wanderers as well, explorers. Our clients need to explore beyond the present moment into new possibilities, not to wander away from responsibility, but rather to explore the unknown in such a way that new possibilities surface. So it may be that by wandering away from a pharmaceutical company, some executive may find the way into some forest where some incredible mushrooms exist, and those mushrooms eat plastic. And actually, that was discovered by a group of college students. I'm not sure if they were from Yale or from Harvard, but they discovered that certain mushrooms could devour plastic, and that could be the answer to our plastic problem. But let's imagine that it's the CEO of a pharmaceutical company who makes this discovery. Then perhaps these mushrooms can be developed and manufactured and used on a huge scale, hopefully without inflated prices. How can we be the magicians of our own stories as well? And the magician is one who holds all things together. The magician is the one who brings people together, doesn't see dichotomies, but rather sees sameness, or else, if not seeing sameness, sees the possibility of all things working in harmony. But there doesn't have to be any dichotomy of any kind. There are infinite archetypes, and we're all governed by some of them some of the time, usually by a number of them, and we need to have some of them to balance others. So, for example, the warrior needs to be balanced by the caregiver. If I were simply a warrior fighting for justice, I might be very ruthless and insensitive and lack compassion for somebody else. But if I have the caregiver archetype that's operative in me, then I'm more likely to be able to fight for justice in a way that's humane and compassionate and doesn't injure people who are vulnerable. So one thing we can do is identify the archetypes that are working in us as coaches, but then we can also invite our clients, whether they're individuals or, again, teams, to see what archetype is operating in them. So you might have a client, for example, who is driven by the savior archetype, and this could be an individual or a team. The idea that they have to rescue humanity or rescue this particular group or rescue this project. And very often anyone who's possessed by this archetype can drive themselves into a bit of a frenzy. The responsibility can be very burdensome. They can become very stressed very quickly. And so there needs to be some balance here. If you're going to be about the business of saving, you also have to be about caring for self, as well as caring for others on the team or others in the workplace. But to be a savior it usually is not the healthiest of archetypes unless you have some other archetypes that are operative at the same time. Like the magician can do some saving without being driven into craziness. So you might want to ask your client, what is their primary image of themselves? Forget about archetypes or using that language, but what is their primary image? I once had a client who told me that her primary image of herself was of a worm that had just been run over by a car on hot asphalt. Yeah, a pretty gruesome image. So there she was, the worm run over, flattened by the car tire onto hot asphalt. So basically she was melted into the asphalt. So we did a lot of unpacking of this image, and that became quite an important focus for our time together. How can you dream a new world into being? What is the new world you would create if you could? Again, imagination is involved there, but also leadership. You know, it's not just about producing a new world, but how you're going to lead others to see that your new world is worth investing in. What is the change you need to embrace? And then I love this one. How can you tame dragons? And you can define dragon in whatever way you want. It's the problem, really. But sometimes if you have a visual, like the problem presenting itself as a dragon, then you can ask, well, what is the best way to approach this dragon? The wanderer might flee from it. The warrior might slay it. The caregiver might enable it. But perhaps the magician would tame it. The magician would have the skills to bring that dragon into harmonious relationship with the community. And then final question from this particular section: how can you repaint the world, and what colors would you choose? I love the graphics in this particular image. I remember walking past at nighttime, and it wasn't too far from the 9/11 memorial, but I was just taken by all the colors and just think somebody there had a vision of the world and was repainting it. And perhaps if each of us could repaint the world in our imaginations or on a canvas, the world would be in a better state than it is today. And so then the invitation with this presentation is, I use the word your, but I could also include me. And so rather than make this directed at you, I have to include myself, but I will read it the way I wrote it, which is leave behind the locked and bolted doors of your mind and find insight, because that's what Epiphany moments are all about. It's about finding insight despite our desire sometimes to run from the truth, or despite the fact that we're locked into the old ways of doing things, despite our lack of imagination. Can we leave behind our limited way of thinking, our ways of thinking that are locked and bolted, and instead open our minds to the insight that is awaiting us? And that is the end for the moment. So
wow,
Beth,
Elizabeth, that was amazing. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I had
That
fun
was
with that.
wonderful. So much to learn and so many practical offerings as well. I love all of the different, the questions that you gave, and the story about the case study and that conversation with the crayons and that epiphany is wonderful. And on that, we can share the handout. So if Leo wants to drop the handout links into the chat, that would be amazing. One of the handouts is that script, isn't it, Elizabeth? Do you want to talk a little bit about the handout?
Yes, the handout is, can I just show my book? I know I'm not supposed to do any promoting, but I do have a book called Mind Shifting Imagery, Image Guidance for Life Coaches. And that's a case study in the book of, and it sort of gives a more detailed approach of what happened with Brian. Basically, the whole case study is now reproduced for everybody to read. And so they can see it was really an amazing experience with him, thinking he could live in harmony with this new boss, and then suddenly realizing, I better get out of here quickly.
Yeah. So interesting. And the other handout is an abbreviated slide deck as well, isn't it?
Yes, there's about 12 different slides giving the questions that I asked, because I hope people weren't trying to take notes. I really hope they weren't.
There was a lot to take in for sure. And obviously for those of you who are members at WBECS as well, then you will get the full slide deck in your membership area as well. Okay, so we'll take a couple of questions in just a moment. I just want to remind everybody that we will be a link to a survey will pop up when you leave the session. So we would really appreciate you taking just a couple of minutes to leave your feedback on Elizabeth's session when you leave the webinar. That's going to be really helpful. Okay, let me see what questions we have, Elizabeth. All right, we've got a question from Olivia who says, is it to the coach, or is it up to the coach to see if the coachee is in a better place, or is it up to the coachee? If the coachee is happy with the changes, but the coach is feeling not having so much progress with the coachee. Sorry, I don't know if that makes sense. I might need to read that again. It's a little bit of broken English there.
I think I'm okay with it, so in other words, if the coachee is happy, should we just leave them where they are? And so I think it really depends on the client. I mean, there may be people who we realize, okay, at this stage of their life where they are, the compassionate thing might be to leave them where they are. And I think about a situation with somebody, I think he was in his 80s or 90s, just in a conversation where I was trying to bring up something of truth, and I suddenly realized this person is not able to handle what I have to say, and actually the kind thing to do is not to say it. So there may be rare times when we decide, let's just leave things as they are. However, there are times when the coach might think, But there's a lot deeper to go. It's like archaeology. I used to go on archaeology digs as a teenager, discovered Punic tombs and all kinds of artifacts. It was really exciting on Malta, of course. And when you find an artifact, you have to go very carefully and dust it off and make sure that you know the context. You can't just dig and then produce the artifact and run off with it. You have to see the context and what does it mean historically speaking. So if let's say a client comes in and says, well, I want to lose weight. Well, what's behind that desire to lose weight? Is it simply for health reasons, or does the person have body image issues? Does the person have a background in being bullied? And so as a coach, we might, without getting into therapy, of course, just ask the kinds of questions that can really get to the heart of the matter. Why is this person wanting to lose weight? Or why does this person want to explore whether to retire at 62 or 70? Is the person afraid of retiring because their self-definition is wrapped up in their job description? Now, the client may not know that, but the coach may intuit it, so if I intuit something, I want to go a bit further, unless it's kinder not to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just reading some of these lovely comments. So when you got to the end and you said, that's the end. Wendy says, what do you mean the end? This is a true opener and beginning for me. And yeah, lots of lovely comments like that. I'm not seeing any more questions at the moment. So I think you presented very clearly there, Elizabeth, and nobody has any kind of clarifying questions. But if anybody does have questions, we do have a few minutes left. If you have questions for Elizabeth, please send them through. Otherwise, Elizabeth, I don't know if you want to maybe chat about, how we had the list of questions that you offered in that slide. And there was one of them that you talked about in detail. Do you want to maybe go into one or two more of those questions and dig a little bit deeper?
Well, there was something I didn't really cover in the presentation, and that is blocks to epiphany moments. And I think that's an important one to look at. And the biggest block to epiphany moment is when the client comes in, and I wrote this down right before our session. And when the client comes in with this attitude, I will pay you to provide unconditional acceptance, to listen with undivided attention, and to help me feel better about myself than I did at the beginning of the session. You will recognize my brilliance and will help me identify the steps I need to take to maintain my world. That is the biggest block. So basically, the client comes in wanting to be affirmed, wanting encouragement, but not wanting to change. And clients do come in that way. They're terrified of change. And what they're looking for is, okay, give me your undivided attention. And so they have this narrative, and we as coaches can get into nodding our heads and agreeing and commiserating. And at the end of the session, we've given them the unconditional acceptance, the sense of, okay, these are the next steps to feel good. But have we helped them go deeper? Because we can be lulled into a kind of believing the version of the client. I'm not saying that the client is being dishonest, but we may not see the client's strategy, unknown to the client as well, to basically shelter the self from truth. So I don't know if that makes sense. I think that's the biggest block to epiphany moments, when the client has constructed this universe and is unwilling to really face reality.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And yeah, we have lots of questions now. So questions from Roger asks, in your experience, have you noticed more of one type of epiphany coming up more frequently than others?
Let me see. Insight, I think, perhaps might be the one that happens the most. In spiritual direction, I have had epiphany moments where the whole room has felt as if it was on fire. Once or twice that happened, but wow. Mostly in coaching, there've been more like an insight, yes, and very seldom a discovery as well. Like I haven't had an Archimedes come in to see me. There's been no great invention that's happened, but
Not yet.
Not yet. It might, it could, but insight, a kind of insight and awareness. And sometimes it's also recognizing the shadow dimension of self. So the CEO who's blaming everybody else, oh, the ball was dropped. And that's another story in the book, that the ball was dropped. Well, who did drop the ball? The coaches and the client's desire to blame somebody else is really part of his or her shadow, a reluctance to face the truth about the self. And speaking of the shadow, each of the archetypes can also have a shadow. The shadow of the magician is the manipulator. The shadow of the caregiver is wanting to be needed. The shadow of the hero is wanting to be in the limelight. And so each of these archetypes has a shadow dimension to it. So the astute coach has to be aware of all this going on all at the same time.
Wow, so fascinating. Question from Wendy. She asks, is it okay to have these questions nearby when I'm conducting a session, or is that going to be too distracting? Like, what do you do? Are they kind of in your mind, or do you have them close by?
The questions are organic. I never have a list of questions. Okay. I don't have any notes in front of me. I have the client usually with a box of crayons and some blank paper. That's something, but I don't have anything beyond myself, because as I'm listening, the questions surface and they come from intuition. So one of the main skills, I think, for a coach who wants to work with epiphany moments is to cultivate intuition. Because when we're into our intuitive selves, then I know what to ask. It's automatic. I just know. I have a feeling. And the other thing with epiphany moments is you can feel them coming. And sometimes the coach has the epiphany before the client. I have a realization, this is what the coachee needs. And there are physical signs. You can actually feel yourself beginning to sweat or tingling or fire, or you can suddenly have this sense of excitement. And this is where looking at the client becomes important. You can see the transformation physically happening in the client as they speak. And so there's a physical dimension to this, which is where in-person coaching is best. Zoom is a great substitute, but telephone coaching, I wouldn't want to do myself, because I want to be there in a way that I can really pick up on the physical signals that help me see when an epiphany is actually in the process of about to happen or is happening. Then I can feel it and see it. Yeah.
Amazing. I love this question from Malcolm. It's on a similar kind of note. He asks, what are the top personal skills required to facilitate an epiphany moment, and how can we as coaches develop them?
Okay, the top skills. Well, intuition would be one. Humility is another. I think perhaps humility is the very top one, because one of the things when you understand archetypes and images and you have this whole world that you are into, you can assume that I know the answer. I can read someone's body language and assume something about that person, and I may be totally wrong. It may be they've just had a bad day, not that they've got low self-esteem. So humility would be the first one. The second one would be the desire to serve. The third one would be intuition. Those are three that come to mind. Creativity. Creativity. I love being creative. That's something I love about coaching. I could never be locked into a coaching box. I have to sort of do it my way in some ways. But those I think are important. Integrity, of course. Yeah, there's a whole list of them.
Yeah, definitely. And I just want to share this question from Cynthia, and then we'll wrap up. So she asks, how would you answer the question that you posed at the beginning? What to do right before a client is about to have an epiphany?
What would I do right before? Well, it depends on the client. Probably, because since I come from a spiritual background, I probably pray about it inside. I wouldn't say a word outside, but certainly inside is sort of a moment of prayer. But I would listen. I would just listen and make sure that I'm listening with the heart as well as with the head. The heart alone is not enough, and the head alone is not enough, but together I have to listen with heart and head, and then I can be present. But this is where showing up in a way that is present becomes so important. We can't be distracted. We can't have another focus. I can't be worrying about how I'm going to pay the mortgage, or, will I pass this exam, or, those other kinds of questions. I have to be absolutely in the moment. And if I can make the client my focus, then I'm more likely to enter into that epiphany experience with the client. Yeah. But I have to let go of my own baggage. Yeah.
Of course. Yeah. Well, this brings us to the end of the session, Elizabeth. That was fantastic. And I'm so glad that we got lots more questions coming in at the end there. I really appreciate that to everybody on the call. Please, just as a quick reminder, we will be dropping a feedback survey, or we won't be dropping it. It'll actually just appear on your screen when you leave the webinar. So we would love to get your feedback on Elizabeth's session. That's going to be really, really helpful. For those of you who didn't get your questions answered, I'm sure Elizabeth would like to hear from you on LinkedIn or something like that. We've also put her email address on the title slide as well. So I'm sure Elizabeth would love to hear from you if you want to continue the conversation. And also just a quick reminder about the IM sessions. They are starting in 1 hour's time. And then we also have some next Tuesday as well. And Leo has just dropped the link for those registrations in the chat box for you. All right. Any final words, Elizabeth, before we go?
Well, just thank you so much for giving me the air, you might say. It's wonderful to share these ideas. These are all topics that I love exploring and working with, and to be able to share them is a real privilege. So thank you so much, and thank you, Leo, for handling everything in the behind the scenes. So thank you both, and for Lynn as well, who is also part of the team. Yeah.
Yes. Absolutely. Oh, thank you so much, Elizabeth. That's lovely. Alrighty, we are going to wrap up. I hope you all have a wonderful end of the week and weekend doing all of those fabulous things that you shared at the beginning of the session. And we will see you next Thursday back for our 2 full summit sessions then. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Hey, it's me again. This is a friendly reminder if you are an ICF member. Now that you've fully reviewed this session recording, simply scroll down to the session resources and find a 1-question quiz. Please complete it, and you will ensure you've received the CC units for this session. And if you've already attended this session live, you've already been granted the CC units, and you don't need to complete this quiz. See you soon. Bye-bye.